Jose, where we are based. And this is the heart of the Silicon Valley, as you probably already know. San Jose is about 60 miles south of San Francisco, for those of you who may not be familiar with this area. Anyway, we have been doing this for the last 6 years. This is the 6th year that we're able to bring Professor Krishna and his investigations into the teachings of Jiddu Krishnamurti to the world. And we are very grateful to him for being the instrument in doing this. So again, on behalf of our dialogue group, Jiddu Krishnamurti Bay Area Dialogue Group based in San Jose, we welcome you all. And like I said, there's just a couple of housekeeping things that I want to mention. We're going to mute everybody while a speaker is on. Secondly, you can post your questions in the chat box at any time. And Casimir will go ahead and then moderate the Q&A session as we approach. And sometime during the middle of the actual talk, we perhaps will take a break, as Professor Krishna was suggesting earlier. And that's about it. At this point in time, I would like to ask Baldev Vohra, a regular attendee of our dialogue group, to say a few words about Dr. Moody, who in turn is going to introduce Professor Krishna to all of us. Thank you. Baldev, sir, you can unmute yourself.
Thank you, Rao. Friends, my name is Baldev Vohra, and I'm happy that Dr. David Moody, Edmund Moody, has joined us today. Actually, in May of 2019, I met Dr. David Edmund Moody in Victoria, Canada, where he was having a dialogue with Professor Krishna and to explore the issues arising from study Krishnamurti's teachings. More recently, Dr. Moody was the keynote speaker at KFA annual gathering held at Oak Grove School in Ohio, California. David is the author of Krishnamurti in America, New Perspective on the Man and His Message. This full-scale biography gives special attention to the crucial events in Krishnamurti's life that occurred in the United States, events that have been neglected or overlooked by previous biographers. David previously wrote An Uncommon Collaboration, David Poem and J. Krishnamurti, and The Unconditioned Mind, J. Krishnamurti and the Oak Grove School. David was the first teacher hired at Oak Grove School in Ohio, California, and later was appointed the educational director by Krishnamurti of the school, the position he held until the end of Krishnamurti's life. He holds a PhD in education from UCLA and remains deeply engaged in the study of Krishnamurti's work. Additional information about David and his background is available at david@moody.com. Now, on behalf of all of us, I welcome Dr. Moody and invite him to introduce Professor Padmanabhan Krishna. Thank you. Dr. Moody.
Okay, thank you very much. That were very kind words, and I appreciate your introduction of me. So I'm going to say a little bit about Dr. Krishna. I've known him for many years, and he and I have even done some actual presentations, as was just mentioned, in various locations, mostly in Ojai, but then also at Wolf Lake in Canada. So it's a great pleasure to have the opportunity to introduce him. And I'm assuming that most of you are aware of his outstanding reputation as a scientist, because, gee, it seems like something's going on with the screen. I don't know if everybody else is experiencing this, but my screen keeps doing a screen sharing thing, and I'm losing. Oh, we're back. Okay, we're back.
Let me take just 1 minute. Ulrich, I think some reason we are seeing your screen. Unless so I don't want to. Is there a way to stop sharing the screen for everybody?
I could pin to the speaker at this moment. Okay, let me pin to that. Let's continue. I apologize, Dr. Moody.
Shall I continue?
Yes, please.
Yes, please.
Okay, so I was saying that I'm assuming that most of you are aware, at least somewhat, of Dr. Krishna's outstanding reputation as a scientist, because it was described in the notes that accompanied the invitation to these talks. He was a professor of physics at Banaras Hindu University for over 20 years. And he's the author of many highly regarded papers and books in the field of crystallography, which is the study of their unique and special properties. And he's a member of the Indian National Science Academy. But I feel like for purposes of tonight's meeting is probably of greater interest to you, what was his, Dr. Krishna's relationship to Krishnamurti and the teachings. And so that's where I'm going to spend most of my time. I think it's germane to understand Dr. Krishna's background to know that he was born into an extended family that had very long and deep connections with the Theosophical Society. In particular, his aunt was Rukmini Arundale, who some of you may recall had a very prominent role in the Theosophical Society during the 1920s and afterwards. Dr. Krishna's cousin was Radha Bernier, who was actually the president of the TS from 1980 to 2013. But in spite of this, Krishna told me once that he was actually hardly exposed at all to theosophical ideas and literature as he was growing up in the nuclear family that he grew up in. On the other hand, when he was 17 years old, he did run across a book in the family home on his father's bookshelves, a book by Krishnamurti. It was called Talks to Students. And Krishna was a student at that time, so he started reading that book and he was quite captivated by it. And then not too long after that, he had the opportunity to read First and Last Freedom, which, as I'm sure you know, is also the theme of the series of talks that we're beginning tonight. So, and then in addition, he began attending the Krishnamurti's public talks. So for all these reasons, I think I have a feeling that Dr. Krishna must have been very, very pleased and rather gratified when he was just 19 years old and a family friend invited him to come to lunch and meet Krishnamurti in person. And this family friend, as it turns out, was a man named Shiva Rao, who also was very, very prominent in the early years of the Theosophical Society. He worked with Leadbeater, he worked with Annie Besant. And in fact, Shiva Rao was one of the people who was sharing a cabin with Krishnamurti in 1925 on board the ship when the news came of the death of Krishnamurti's brother. So that gives you a sense of how closely involved he was with Krishnamurti and the TS at that time. Anyway, we're flash forwarding now to 1957, Shiva Rao is inviting Krishnamurti over for lunch, and since Dr. Krishna is a family friend, invites him to come too. And I feel like it was rather fortunate that he had that opportunity at that early age. And he writes in his book, Krishna does, that the meeting was quite illuminating for him, because after having read First and Last Freedom, he had formed an image of what kind of person Krishnamurti was. He'd formed an image of, a kind of a monk-like person, someone wise and calm and, kind of passive. And but the man that he actually met was very vibrant, vital, spontaneous, full of passion, and not at all like the image that he had formed. So all during Dr. Krishna's years studying at the university, and then again when he became a professor, he continued attending Krishnamurti's talks whenever possible. And he was so dedicated that he used to ride his bicycle 10 miles each way to get to the talk and then obviously another 10 miles to come home. And he didn't just attend the talks, he would stay afterwards in order to have the opportunity pester Krishnamurti with questions about whatever was on his mind or he couldn't quite figure out. In fact, he did this so often and so persistently that at one point, Krishnamurti said to him, "Too many questions, my boy, too many questions." And another indication of Dr. Krishna's, deep and abiding interest in the teachings occurred in 1977, because at that time he was visiting Brockwood Park. And also visiting Brockwood at that time were David Bohm and Asit Chandmal. And so here are three scientists, all of whom have long-standing and deep interest in Krishnamurti and the teachings. They got to talking one night, and they formulated a question which, really puzzled them. And the question was, a deep perception is required in order to dissolve the ego, and yet the very presence of the ego prevents such a deep perception. And how is that contradiction or paradox to be resolved? And so they didn't just leave it at formulating this question. They took it the next morning and had a long dialogue with him about it. And the entire transcript of that rather fascinating dialogue, three scientists and Krishnji on that theme, is included in Dr. Krishna's book. So that was 1977, and then 8 years later, in the fall of 1985, Krishnamurti was traveling through India for the last time. That time he was already feeling the effects of the cancer of the pancreas, of which he died a few months later. But he knew that his time remaining was rather short. And so in the fall of 1985, late 1985, around that period, even earlier, actually, going all the way back to the summer at Brockwood, he was going around to each one of his schools and foundations and trying to put them on the firmest possible footing for when he would not be there any longer, which he anticipated was quite near future. And so those were the circumstances in which Krishnamurti asked Dr. Krishna to assume responsibility for the Rajghat Education Center in Varanasi. And at that time, Dr. Krishna was just 47 years old. He was well established as a professor of physics at Banaras Hindu University. He was married. He had 4 kids, 4 daughters. Their ages were 24, 23, 19, and 16. So he was thoroughly involved in his career and his family. And Krishnamurti was asking him to completely abandon this very secure and interesting career, to give it all up, come and live at Rajghat and take charge of the whole educational center. It was really, it seems to me, a rather audacious request. But Krishnamurti told Krishna that he was offering him a jewel on a silver platter. And And that title was so meaningful that Krishna made that phrase the title of his book. And of course, as you must know, he accepted the offering. So almost everything I've described is contained in that book, which I highly recommend. It has many interesting things. And I'll just mention a couple of them, a couple more before I stop. Krishnamurti told Dr. Krishna that there were very few people in the world who he trusted completely, but Krishna was one of them. And he also said of Dr. Krishna, he said, he says what he means and he means what he says. And Dr. Krishna said that was the highest compliment he had ever received. And finally, I would just like to note the very last thing that Krishnamurti ever said to Dr. Krishna. I found it rather remarkable. This was in Ojai now, and in February of 1986. It was, I think, as far as I can tell, about 10 days before Krishnamurti died. And Dr. Krishna had been visiting for final meetings, had been visiting here in Ojai for final meetings of trustees and so on. But now he was leaving. And the last thing Krishnamurti said to him was, "Sir, I am surrounded by people who have not got the foggiest idea what I'm talking about." And Krishna wrote this in his book. He wrote, "I could only say, I am sorry, sir, for it was true, and I was one of them." So if I may, I'm going to repeat that. Krishnamurti said his last words to Dr. Krishna. Krishnamurti said, "I'm surrounded by people who have not the foggiest idea what I'm talking about." And Krishna wrote, "It was true, and I was one of them." One of many remarkable and rather fascinating passages in Krishna's book. So I'd just like to conclude by saying that in my experience in Ojai, it seems to me true that many of the people around Krishnamurti had not the foggiest idea what he was talking about. But on the other hand, I cannot agree with Krishna that he himself was one of them. It seems to me that he has a very clear, very deep, and even uncanny understanding of many of the points in the teachings. And I feel sure that you will agree after you hear him in this series of talks. And so I feel very honored and grateful for the opportunity to introduce Dr. Krishna.
Thank you, David, for all those kind words and bringing back memories of a long past. It was quite fascinating to listen to you.
Oh, good.
So thank you very much.
Of course.
Now, I have made a certain departure today from what was announced. I'm not going to start taking up the text and discussing the text today, because I felt a number of new people have come and joined. I needed to talk about our approach to Krishnamurti's teaching, because that approach has to be very different from what we have been trained to do with a book or a lecture during the academic life through school and college and even later. And so we need to approach this text of Krishnamurti with that kind of mindset. And I'm going to describe what, according to me, that mindset is. It's not something that Krishnaji talked about in detail. So these thoughts are mine, but They originate out of a statement of his where he said, the approach to a question is more important than either the question or the answer. So that's what prompted me to think about this approach. And indeed, I feel that the approach has to be very different from what we normally are used to. Most books are written with the idea of informing us or giving us new knowledge or a new form of logic, or trying to convert our views to a different view. Krishnamurti's book is not for any of these purposes. His concern was to transform consciousness. And any kind of intellectual inquiry, debate, argument, ideation does not transform consciousness. It is stored up in memory as intellectual property. And just like material property does not alter consciousness, intellectual property also does not alter consciousness. Otherwise, the professor of philosophy in any university can tell you everything that about the Buddha or about Jesus Christ or about Socrates, any of these saints, because he has read about all of them. But his consciousness is not the consciousness of any of them. So the transformation of consciousness is quite different from the transformation of ideas or the acquisition of knowledge. And that's why Krishnamurti called it a pathless land, because there is a path to knowledge, including the knowledge of Krishnamurti. And we have all read his books and we do have knowledge of Krishna. But to come upon that consciousness requires a deep insight of one's own. And insight is a direct perception of the truth. So this religious quest, which Krishnamurti called self-knowledge, is not really knowledge about the self. It is at the level of perception. Perception includes the intellect and the mind, but it also is a more holistic happening, which includes all the senses and the body. So, how does one go from the knowledge of the truth, which you can get either from Krishnamurti or the Buddha or Socrates and so on, to the perception of that truth for yourself? And religious truth is not an idea that can be shared by another with another. Therefore, the approach to Krishnamurti's book has to be very different from the approach to a novel or a scientific book and so on. He's not trying to convince you of anything. His purpose is to awaken your intelligence, our intelligence. And intelligence is the capacity in this field, is the capacity to discern what is true and what is false, what is real, part of nature, and what is illusory, merely propaganda or a construct of thought. Now, both kinds of things are there present in our memories, because we all grow up in a particular home in a particular country, which has a particular religion, particular ideas, and so on. And we grow up with them and we imbibe them unconsciously. That's what is called the conditioning. And unless we have examined that conditioning, it includes a lot of illusions and some facts too. So you have to examine that and discern what is fact from what is illusion. The facts don't create a problem, but the illusions create a hell of a lot of problem. They produce disorder in consciousness. So just as in science, we talk about the causation in nature, and the scientist observes that causation, inquires, formulates theories and so on, and eventually tries to come upon what is the ultimate reality. Krishnamurti is asking us to do something similar in the field of consciousness. He's saying your consciousness contains a whole lot of illusions, false notions, which produce a lot of disorder in your life and therefore in society. And that can be ended, that disorder can be ended by ending those illusions. But to do that, you must not be attached to them. You must not identify with your conditioning. You must distance yourself from it and observe it objectively. The scientist does that by using a microscope whose lenses are free from aberration, both chromatic aberration and spherical aberration, so that he gets a magnified image of the object exactly in the same shape as the real object. Now, here, the mind is the microscope, and your senses are observing, which includes the intellect. If the mind itself is distorting what you are observing, then you cannot come upon reality. You cannot come upon the truth. So truth is the direct perception of what is, and that is distorted by our beliefs, our identification, our attachments, our opinions, and so on. So you have to free yourself of all that. It's important to remember this. So Krishnamurti said, don't take your own opinions to be truth. Doubt them. Inquire into them. Not only your own opinions, but also Krishnamurti's statements. And that's a very important thing. He didn't say that out of politeness. He said that because he was aware of this deep truth, that merely the knowledge of the truth does not transform consciousness. And his purpose was the transformation of consciousness. If you read the 1929 speech, which he gave when he dissolved the Order of the Star of the East, he says that my mission is to set man free, free from the conditioning, free from what colors his thoughts and free from all prejudices, let us say, so that he can, what he sees is always accurate, rational, holistic. So that is the purpose. And he even went to the extent of saying that there is no such thing as my teaching. You don't have to understand my teaching. You have to understand yourself. The object of what we have to understand is our own consciousness and how it operates. not Krishnamurti's words and teachings. They may create the question in your mind, but that exploration of that question has to be your own. If you just borrow his exploration, you know what Krishnamurti taught and said, but you don't have a direct perception of that truth for yourself. So it's an important part of his teaching that you need to be a light unto yourself. You can't get the truth from another, neither the guru nor the sacred books and so on. They can give you ideas. They can give you questions. And questions are a jewel, provided you will investigate them with an open mind, a learning mind. Learning this, what is true and what is false. Not learning as we know in school, college, and so on, which is adding to memory and adding to skills and knowledge. That's a different kind of learning. This learning, which he calls self-knowledge, is not knowledge about the self, which you can get from a psychology book. It is that understanding, that perception, which comes from your own observation and your own perceptions in daily life. And this is important. He said, don't separate this inquiry or the religious inquiry from daily life, because otherwise it becomes an escape, an entertainment away from daily life. The reality is part of daily life. And so you must observe your consciousness as it is operating in daily life. And don't quickly answer that question or just agree or disagree with some view which you have heard. Why does he say that? Because if I hear somebody say something and I just agree with it, it just means that I already think what he is saying, which means even your opinions don't change. If I disagree with it and reject it as nonsense, I don't even consider it. So it doesn't even enter into my memory or my opinions or my consciousness. So nothing changes. Nothing can change if you just agree or disagree. But that's what we have been taught through academics to do, to agree or disagree and to fight for what your opinion and so on. So his approach is very different. What is that approach? He says, can you listen to that statement? Neither accept it nor reject it. Turn it into a question. Is that true? And don't answer that question quickly, because you will answer from your conditioning and your mind is also conditioned. But get the answer through exploration, through observation. We do that in science too. We say don't accept any theory or anything. You do experiments, you verify, and you perceive what the truth is about it. But there in science, you have a definite method, because science deals only with the measurable. And consciousness phenomena are not measurable. So there are parallels between the scientific approach and the approach to Krishnamurti teaching. But this is in the realm of the immeasurable, the realm of consciousness. But here also he is saying there is causation, and you can watch the causation and learn about it. And if it begins from an illusion, which means a false assumption or a false notion, you can drop that. You will drop that, because if you see that a false notion is producing havoc in your life, you will realize the danger of that illusion, then the illusion will drop away. It won't remain. And that's brings about a certain transformation of consciousness. So the change that he is talking about is not coming through knowledge. The change is coming from this learning, the self-knowledge, which is at the level of perception of what is true and what is false, so that the false drops away. And the disorder that false was producing in your consciousness dissolves. So he says you can't come upon order by formulating order and then practicing it. You have to go indirectly. You have to end the disorder. You can end the disorder in your consciousness because it arises from all kinds of notions in your head which are false. And precisely because they are false, they can be dropped. You can't drop the real. I mean, if you fall and hurt yourself, you will have pain. That's biological pain. That won't go away, whatever you may think. But self-pity is a psychological construct, an excessive concern about your own being. So that comes from a wrong approach to what is taking place. And that is what causes sorrow. Sorrow is psychological suffering, not the physical suffering or pain. That is not sorrow. So the ending of sorrow, which he talked about, requires self-knowledge, which is this quest for what is true and what is false. There is a beautiful passage in the book Meeting Life. It is selected passages selected by Mary Latins. And this passage refers to what is transformation. And I want to share that with you so that we have an idea what is the purpose of Krishnamurti's talks, videos, dialogues, or our discussion about those questions which he has raised. In all these, the ultimate purpose is the transformation of consciousness. Now, what does that mean? I want to share this with you. Let me see if I can put that on the screen. Can you see the screen?
No, sir. Are you, did you, there is.
I clicked on share. I clicked on share.
I see.
The participant has enabled closed captioning. Who can see this transcript recording on?
Upper, I'm doing the recording. Now click on the share screen button at the bottom.
At the bottom.
At the bottom.
Mine has it at the top called share. I already clicked on that.
And then did it share your screen?
It says the share recipients you select will receive a notification email with a link to the file.
No. You're trying to share a file up. You're not sharing. Look at the bottom and you'll see, you should see a share screen.
A green button.
A green button, yes.
A green button. Yeah. In my laptop, I don't see a green button.
No, sir, he has to make him as a co-host. You have to maybe
It has
make
to be a
him
co-host.
co-host.
Oh, no, you don't have to be a co-host.
I have a better solution. I'll just read this. It's a short passage.
Okay.
And if you are all able to listen to me, that's good enough.
Okay, sir, do that.
Okay. The questioner says, is there such a thing as transformation? What is it to be transformed? And Krishnamurti says, when you are observing, seeing dirt on the road, seeing how politicians behave, seeing your own attitude towards your wife, your children, and so on, transformation is there. Do you understand? To bring about some kind of order in daily life, that is transformation. Not something extraordinary out of this world. When one is not thinking clearly, rationally, be aware of that and change it, break it. That is transformation. If you are jealous, watch it. Don't give it time to flower. Change it immediately. That is transformation. When you are greedy, violent, ambitious, trying to become some kind of holy man, see how it is creating a world of tremendous uselessness. I don't know if you are aware of this. Competition is destroying the world. The world is becoming more and more competitive, more and more aggressive. And if you change it immediately, that is transformation. And if you go very much deeper into the problem, it is clear that thought denies love. Therefore, one has to find out whether there is an end to thought, an end to time. Not philosophize over it and discuss it, but find out. Truly, that is transformation. And if you go into it very deeply, transformation means never a thought of becoming, comparing. It is being absolutely nothing. So you see, he goes all the way from our daily life, watching dirt on the road and so on. But that watching has to be done with a learning mind. The learning mind is not an accepting mind or a rejecting mind, nor a judging mind. So he talked about passive awareness. Can you be passively aware, not actively interfering with what you are seeing? Because truth is not the known, it's the unknown. And you can't come to the truth through the known. It needs a creative perception beyond the known in order to come upon the truth. There is not just one truth. For every illusion, there is the truth which, when perceived, would destroy that illusion. That process is called self-knowledge. The process, it is a process. It is a time process. So when the consciousness frees itself of its conditioning, which doesn't mean the conditioning ends, but it no longer dominates in your consciousness. You're willing to drop it, question it, doubt it. That's freedom. Then he says, learning begins. Until you free yourself of your conditioning, learning does not even begin. So the change that he is talking about is a byproduct of this learning called self-knowledge. It's not a product of your will. The will is the essence of the ego, and the ego is the very source of all disorder in consciousness. Ego being self-centered action and motive. So this inquiry itself has to be free from all self-centered motive of becoming something and so on, benefiting from it. It's just the quest for truth, for the love of truth, not for any achievement. They encourage that in science too. When Faraday discovered electromagnetism, he demonstrated in a big hall He took a metal coil and let me go back to my image. He demonstrated in a big hall a metal coil connected to a current measuring device, and he pushed a magnet towards along the axis of that coil towards the coil, not even touching it. And he showed that there is a deflection, which means a current is flowing in the coil. So at the end of his lecture, somebody asked in the back, all this is very well, but of what use is this discovery? And his answer, which has become a classic in the history of science, was it's a newborn child. Of what use is a newborn child? So he was not doing that experiment or discovering electromagnetism in order that we would have fans and air conditioning and lights and so on. All that was a consequence of his discovery. But that was not his purpose. His purpose was simply to find the truth about nature. So can we be like that? Can we learn about our consciousness in that way without asking something for it in return for ourselves, without any desire to become something, just in order to learn the truth? And it is the perception of the truth that will bring about change. You can't change yourself, not through your deliberation and so on. Those are very superficial changes. Of course, you can change your dress and you can change your way of doing exercise and so on. Of course, when you're not talking at that level, you can't change your consciousness, alter your consciousness, but it can be altered. And it's a byproduct of self-knowledge, which is the key to wisdom. So he started his schools. He wanted that the schools, in addition to imparting all the knowledge which they are doing now, should also encourage this inquiry of self-knowledge in the children. Of course, that inquiry would have to be at the appropriate level for that age. But you would promote inquiry right from the beginning, which means not insist on threatening or obedience and authority and so on, except because I am saying so, but encourage question so that you have a different kind of mind. Later on, it can grapple with more intricate questions like we are trying to grapple with in this course. Now, David Bohm asked him, does it not require talent? Isn't it that some people are talented and they can go beyond the known and others can't? He said, no, sir. We share the same consciousness. Everybody can do this. But you don't stay with the question long enough. That was his answer. And so he said, this was, I think, 1972 or so. He said to David Bohm and some of other people who were keen on his teachings, let's go and close ourselves in a room, and we won't leave the question until we have found the answer being the truth. Huh? The answer to a question in this field doesn't lie outside the question, it lies inside the question. So while you are exploring the question, not only intellectually, but also observationally, through passive awareness, the truth can come to you in a flash, and that is insight. And without that insight, there is no transformation of consciousness. So, my friends, I'll end it here. I just want to point out that the approach to Krishnamurti's text, which we will take up from tomorrow, has to be in this spirit. Very different from the normal way we read books in order to gather information, in order to get convinced of some argument and so on. That's not the purpose of Krishnamurti's teaching. He's demanding this creative perception which brings about a change or transformation of consciousness. And he's saying it begins in daily life from simple things like, why do you get angry? Start with those things. Don't begin with, is the observer the observed? You will come to that question when you do. And then at that time you knock on that door. There is some confusion in the minds of people who have asked me, isn't this process then a time process? Now, time is of two types. When Krishnaji uses the word time, he means psychological time, which is becoming, which is the same as ego or ambition or motive. There is chronological time. The chronological time will pass whether you have perception or you don't have perception. Whether you live with illusion or you live with the truth, the chronological time will pass because that is measured by the earth going around the sun. It's not going to stop for you because you haven't had perception. So change comes as a byproduct of deep perception of the truth. But there's not just one truth to be perceived. So it's not a matter of just all of a sudden coming upon something or the guru coming and blessing you and getting it. If it was so simple, why did Krishnamurti have to give talks for 60 years, exhorting people to do this inquiry? He could have just sat there and put his hands on my head and said, here, my dear, the enlightenment is there, entered your mind. It's not possible. It's false notion. Therefore, he denied the role of a guru. He said, you are the teacher and you are the taught. You are everything. But you are depending on other people, trying to run to this man, that man, read sacred books, read that, acquire it through knowledge. And knowledge doesn't take you there. Don't accept what he says. Try it. Read the Bible 100 times and see whether you come upon non-violence. There, Jesus Christ said, when the other man hits one cheek, show your other cheek also, which means don't retaliate. See whether you can end hatred in that way. It is not something you can do with your decision. You can't even end worrying with a decision. Say that to yourself, that from tomorrow I won't worry, and see whether you are able to do that. So when in this passage which I just read, Krishnaji says, break it, change it immediately. He is not asking you to do it through decision, through will. It's important to understand that. Real change comes as a byproduct of understanding. So he's asking you to come upon it, that change through self-knowledge. And that is the purpose, entire purpose of this entire series of not understanding his teaching, but understanding ourselves. Thank you. Thank you for your patience.
Good.
So,
Go ahead.
thank you, Professor Krishna.
You're welcome.
Now I'm going to read the questions as they came in sequence.
Sure.
So, Krasmir,
Yeah.
Professor Krishna initially at the beginning of the meeting was advising about a 5-minute break before we start the QA, so that people can take some time to get a drink or whatever.
If people need that, I mean, you can ask Prasad if people would like to have a 5-minute break, we can do that. If they don't need a break, then we can go ahead. I don't need a break.
Me either. Okay, let's continue then.
Okay.
Okay.
Go ahead, Krishna.
So now we can go to question number 1. Is consciousness measurable or immeasurable?
It is not measurable. Can you measure how much you love your wife? There is no measure. Therefore, the scientific method, which involves measurement, applies only to determine truths which are from the measurable. The external world of nature is measurable, but the inner world of our consciousness is not measurable. The consciousness phenomena are not measurable. Therefore, you can't make a theory about it and then test that theory by making predictions and verifying predictions like we do in science. So that's where the similarity between this inquiry and the scientific inquiry ends. But they are both inquiries into truth. One is the truth about nature, how nature functions. The other is the truth about how our consciousness functions and how disorder arises in our consciousness in the form of all the negative emotions. And virtue, as Socrates pointed out 2000 years ago, is just order in consciousness. We have in religions have defined virtue in terms of actions, do this, don't do this. And people have tried to follow that, but they have failed. So to learn from that virtue doesn't come into consciousness unless you come upon wisdom through self-knowledge. Long ago, I think in the 13th century, there was a philosopher named Basho in Japan who said, don't try to follow the wise man. Pursue the wisdom that he got. That's what Krishnamurti is asking us to do. Come upon wisdom for ourselves, not follow him or follow anybody else. Because the following itself is a false notion.
Thank you, Professor. The next question is from Stephen. Can you say more about Kay's statement that no one around me has the foggiest idea what I'm talking about? Intellectually, did they get it? Or was he referring more to they haven't transformed their consciousness, or both?
No, intellectually, many people understood him. And I think David Bohm understood him extremely well and even corrected his expressions and so on. But David Bohm didn't have that consciousness which Krishnamurti lived with, nor do I. So he was talking in terms of actually perceiving that consciousness. You can know that consciousness only when you actually come upon it. And it was true that none of us have come upon that consciousness. And his analysis, which we don't have to accept, was that you don't stay with the question long enough. That means you accept some answer, then the answer kills the question. And so the inquiry ends before it comes upon the truth. So my experience, which is not what Krishnamurti said, but my experience in life with his teaching has been that many illusions which are simpler have ended. But the ultimate illusion of being a separate self may not end. So we don't know what is total freedom, but we know what is partial freedom. You are free from casteism, you're free from religious bigotry, you're free from divisiveness, you're free from competitiveness, and so on. Those are easier things to discover and free yourself of. It's an actual change. It's not that that is not an actual change, but it doesn't mean that all attachment, all other problems have ended. So that's what my experience is. That most people around Krishnamurti have, it's not that they didn't get anything, they got everything, but nobody really came upon the state of his consciousness, went all the way and came upon that. That is what is called liberation, enlightenment, and so on. Nobody has come up. But that's not the aim of this inquiry. This learning is done without a motive. If you make that into an aim, it becomes ambition, it becomes desire, and sustains the ego. So it becomes counterproductive. This inquiry itself must not be egoistic. Through an egoistic inquiry, you cannot come to freedom from the ego.
And now the next question from Gopal. Sir, can you please elucidate what you personally understand Krishnamurti means when he talks of a sane psyche for exploration? How can I understand for myself if I am sane enough or eligible enough to explore the teachings?
By watching your own consciousness very honestly. If you still have anger, you have jealousy, you have greed, you have envy operating in your consciousness, you know that you haven't really perceived the truth. So that's the litmus test. It's not simply intellectually you may understand, but you have to watch your consciousness and see whether the disorder has ended. And that's quite a perceptible thing because the disorder produces suffering, it produces pain, which is very discernible. So Krishnamurti said, every time you experience psychological disorder in the form of anger, jealousy, violence, hatred, etc., negative emotions, it's an opportunity to learn about yourself. Don't suppress it. Don't say this should not happen and so on. It's an opportunity to learn from where does this arise in me. That anger, that violence, that hatred arises in my consciousness and I haven't understood from where it comes and how does it rise. When you observe yourself objectively, you can discern that and you will come upon, you will find that it begins with some assumption which is false. I'll give you a small example. We get angry when somebody disagrees with us or criticizes us because it hurts you that he is looking down on me. Now, what is caused within me? What causes this hurt? That's a psychological hurt. The expectation that he should agree with me. From where does this assumption come? Is the other person created by nature or by God, whichever you prefer, word you prefer, to suit you? And are you created to suit somebody else? So from where does this assumption come that other people must suit me? They don't. They have their own ideas. They have their own consciousness. they have their own ignorance, and they are living what they are living. And you are objecting to that and feeling hurt. That's just, you are approaching life in a false way. Therefore, that hurt comes. So when you realize that, you stop that feeling, that expectation. You just notice that this man thinks differently from me. It's all right. Why should two intelligent people agree on what they see? They don't agree. Not only politicians, husband and wife don't agree. So it's a normal thing. Disagreement is quite a normal thing, but it is something that needs to be explored. It happens in our institutions too. One group of people think that we should be doing this, another group says, no, we should not be doing this. Each one is assessing whether this would be good for the institution or not. So Krishnamurti suggested, don't confront each other. Don't get attached to your opinion and try to promulgate that, because that will lead to war. They will do the same and you will fight with them. Instead, have a dialogue. A dialogue means you have to then ask the other person, why do you think so? And he can ask you, why do you think so? And in so talking to each other in a friendly way, without anger, without expectation and all that, you may understand each other, and that understanding will bring about a change. So it's a very practical way of doing it. This business of fighting and using power in order to prevail is what is creating the world of complete uselessness. This is what he pointed out in that passage, that this competition, this rivalry is creating havoc in the world. So change it. Don't approach life that way. That's how I understand him. He didn't say that in so many words. He said what he said. I have read that. We are exploring what he said. I'm exploring what he said, and these are my views. You should not accept. When he says you should not accept his views, there is much less reason for you to accept my views. But the source of a question is not important. Whether you get it from Krishnamurti or your son comes and asks you, Father, is pleasure the same thing as happiness? The question is the same, whether Krishnamurti raises it or your son raises it. It doesn't matter who raises it. How you approach that question, how you explore it, determines what understanding you develop. That's what he means of staying with the question and exploring the question. It's a bit like, if I might use a metaphor or an analogy, the game of treasure hunt which children play. We have all played that game in school and so on. The teacher hides something in a garden and releases the children and says, find the treasure where it lies. You don't know where it lies. You have to search here and there and so on. So it's like that. We don't know where the truth lies. But you can search here and there, and that is the inquiry. You're digging around, looking at it and so on. That's what we are doing in our dialogues. But the aim of it is to come upon a treasure which you don't know where it is. So there is no path to it. It's a pathless land. But you can get it. It can come to you.
So the next question is from Pradeep Kumar. I'm a bit confused about the use of the term consciousness. I guess it belongs to an individual. How is it different from wisdom or truth, which is universal?
The word consciousness has not been very precisely defined, neither in science nor in religion. Different people use it to mean different things. Krishnamurti said, consciousness as we know it, as you know it, is its content. So if you are brought up as a Christian, then you have the Christian content inside that, and that is your conditioning. And that conditioning is what you know as consciousness. But that's all held in memory. And if you can free yourself of that, then there is a consciousness which is not conditioned. So in a sense, now I'm saying what I think, which is not what Krishnamurti said. There are two parts to our being. One is this conditioned part, which is our personality. The other is the unconditioned part, which is pure awareness. Because as soon as you are conscious, a child becomes conscious. Even before he can think, he already has awareness. So awareness is not born of thought. It's something, a different faculty in us. And you can use awareness to learn about how thought operates, how it creates disorder, what the ego is, and so on. Awareness has no structure. It is just this capacity to see, to perceive. When you look at a tree, you are aware of the tree. You don't need to think about it. But when you think about it, you talk about the color of the tree, the height of the tree, the growth of the tree, and so on, so on. So thought analyzes, dissects, explains, and so on. And that's the role of thought. I'm using thought to communicate right now what I want to communicate to you. And that's a legitimate use of thought. But there is also a lot of disorderly use of thought, creating ambition, doing propaganda, all kinds of things. So you have to know exactly what is the right place of thought in your life. And that requires a lot of inquiry and observation in order to put it in the right place. Otherwise, it gets trapped in all kinds of nonsense. See, all this seems difficult because right from childhood, what has been encouraged is memory and knowledge and skills. Nobody encouraged this learning. Nobody encouraged awareness. And that's why now it appears very difficult after so many years, because basically one has got addicted to thinking. And thought is a product of the known. It can't take you beyond the known.
So next, Salvador Rojas is asking, is consciousness to be transformed when we understand its content?
As you understand the content and free yourself of the false content, false means it is just a construct of your thought, it is not part of nature. Then, if you see the falseness of it and the danger of it, it drops away. And that brings about a change in your consciousness. You're still not completely free. There is still other content. You have freed yourself of one particular illusion. But if you can free yourself of one illusion, you can potentially free yourself of all illusion. That capacity is there. But we give up. As soon as you become comfortable, you give up on this quest. And Krishnamurti is saying, don't do that. Continue with this learning mind all through life.
So next, the question is from Sam Gezawat. The transformation K speaks of requires such sensitivity and humility, the traits that are considered weakness in this world. What does it take to be a light to myself in this world of powerful delusional influences?
Yeah, that's why he wanted to change education, because education, as it is at present, is making us insensitive. It directs the sensitivity only in certain directions, does not permit a holistic sensitivity. Make it over cultivates the intellect and ignores the psyche and the emotional aspects of a human being. And that creates a lopsided mind in the human body. So once you have become insensitive, it becomes very difficult, because the insensitive person is unable to perceive many things. If you are insensitive to the beauty of nature, you will pass by a river without noticing. It's as simple as that. So right in childhood, the school must include activities which promote sensitivity, such as caring for a plant or for a pet and looking after him. That increases sensitivity. Art, music increases sensitivity. But all the time only logic and reason and wars and history and all that doesn't increase sensitivity. And if you promote the ego, as you do when you encourage competition and you encourage rewards and so on, comparison, who's going to stand first and so on, you promote the ego in the child. And the ego is the source of all disorder in consciousness. And then we complain that this chap doesn't love, he has become hard-hearted and so on. But all along in your education, nobody cared whether you were sensitive, whether you had compassion. As the questioner said, without humility and sensitivity, you can't get there. Absolutely true. So when you discover that, you have to make that the mission in your life, to come upon sensitivity and humility. When you see the need for it, it will come. But at present, we think it is only necessary to earn money and acquire a big position or to dominate on others and so on. So we chase power, position, status. All that is the ego activity in us. And then we complain that relationships are breaking down, and people are fighting all the time, and so on, so on. But it's the consequence of the way we are living. It'll come in one of the chapters where he talks about individual and society, what our consciousness is, that's what determines what society is. So we are responsible for all the disorder that we see in society. Each one of us is contributing to that disorder.
So now Hareshwar Singh is asking, are the contents of consciousness also immeasurable?
A lot of it is immeasurable. Some of it is measurable. Like my ability at physics is measurable. You can give me a test and so on and measure, and then they'll give me marks out of 100. That's what they do in education. So you measure my ability. But you can't measure how friendly I feel, or how much love I have, or how much anger or jealousy I have. You can't measure that. So there are two aspects to our being. One is the measurable, the other is the immeasurable. And this is the field of the immeasurable, psyche. The measurable, the science deals with.
We have two questions from Kapil. The first one, does listening or observation also bring order in health?
Depends on what you mean by listening. In the first chapter, which we will take up tomorrow, Krishna talks about the difficulty of listening as he understands it. We consider listening to be just, you are all listening to me now. That's not his idea of listening. That is just hearing. You are hearing me. Listening, he says, requires you to free yourself of all reaction, all judgment, all prejudices in order to listen to what that person is saying. So mostly, we will take it up. So that's the first chapter of the book. Please read it, and tomorrow we will take it up in detail. That's the difficulty of communication.
And the second question, is sorrow a sensation? Feeling uncomfortable is called sorrow.
Well, discomfort is biological. I mean, if it's too hot or too cold, or I'm sitting on pins, there is discomfort, pain. But there is also self-pity. Oh, why did this happen to me? And etc., etc. There is a lot of psychological sorrow. Psychological pain is sorrow. Hurt is sorrow. You get hurt by somebody because somebody's remark, that is sorrow. So there is such a thing as the ending of sorrow, but there is no such thing as the ending of pain. You would have to go to the doctor and get a tablet to, it's a nervous reaction of the body. You can't end that through thinking. And body has put that, nature has put that here for your protection, so that you don't kill yourself.
Now we have a question from Ivan. Does consciousness have limitations?
If it identifies with its conditioning, it limits itself. Because it is only thinking in terms of me, mine, my religion, my country, my people, my ideas, my success, and so on. Everything. That's the ego state. The ego state is when the concern is all rooted in the me and the mind. That's the ego state. But when you free yourself of the ego state, only then there is love. Krishnamurti says love is where the self is not. That means the selfish motive is not there. Then we have that capacity for love, for compassion. You can see that in yourself. Not all your actions are out of the ego. So ego comes only out of a certain approach to life. And when you discover that that approach creates all the disorder in your life, the danger of that, when you perceive it, that approach will end. Nature has put an intelligence in our system which does not allow us to court danger. But we court danger because we are not aware of that danger. We get addicted to smoking, to drinking, to worrying, and so on. So many addictions we have because we are not aware of the danger of that. If right from the beginning we are aware of the danger, it won't happen. Awareness is at the level of perception, not not awareness in the sense, are you aware of what is the capital of UK? No, that awareness is just knowledge or ignorance at the level of knowledge. We are not talking of that. But at the level of sensing, perception.
Next, a question from Hansa Chowdhury. Knowing working consciousness or consciousness as it is, can we use it for becoming? What is the use of consciousness?
All that we are doing now is using consciousness. Without consciousness, you would be unconscious. You can't perceive, you can't. So, consciousness is a certain capacity. Nature has put that into us. How we use it is up to us. And we have not learned what is the right use of it and what is creating disorder. That understanding is called self-knowledge. You have to discover that for yourself. There is, Krishnamurti talked about the art of living. That is the art of living, to put everything in its right place. Awareness in its right place, thought in its right place, knowledge in its right place, memory in its right place. There is nothing that is completely useless, unnecessary, and there is nothing that is not dangerous if you don't know its limits.
So because now we are approaching the end of the originally scheduled time, I just would like to say that there are 2 questions left. What we could do is I could read the first one, and if the answer is not too long, the professor can answer. Otherwise, we can pass on those questions to Professor Krishna to potentially be answered via email or the next day.
Or, as Krishnamurti said, stay with the question.
Yes.
Don't answer it.
So the first question, the first of the 2 remaining questions from Lovely Ray. The moment we are making inquiry for the sake of transformation, doesn't the ego come into play automatically? What is the state from where the ego-free inquiry can be made? Or is it at all possible?
Brief answer. The desire to learn something is not egoistic. The desire to become is egoistic. So the moment you have an end in view, it becomes a means to an end, which is the ego process. When there is no end in view, you're just learning, like the answer that Faraday gave about electromagnetism. That's a newborn child. Of what use is a newborn child? So don't always ask about what benefit this I will get from this. That is still the old conditioning, that everything we judge from the point of view of whether it will benefit me or not benefit me.
And since we are doing so well, maybe I will just ask the last question because it appears to be short. I don't know about the answer though. So it's from Vanaparti. Is love a content in consciousness?
It is a certain innate capacity that nature has put into us, but it is destroyed by the ego process, because the ego process brings division, hatred, competition, rivalry, and all that, and that destroys love, compassion, friendship, and so on. So but it is there innately. You can see that. If somebody falls on the road, your first urge is to go and help him. There is no motive in that. You're not wanting to be praised for that or paid for that and so on. You just do. Why do you do that? It's already, nature has put it into us. Even animals do that. When one animal is in trouble, other animals sometimes go and help. I think we can end it here.
I would like to turn it over back to Rao and Prasad.
Okay, Rao.
I think we have come to the end of the session, as Professor Krishna has rightly put. And thank you all, everybody, for today. And we will meet at the same time tomorrow, 24 minus 1.5 hours, whatever that is.
Yes,
Depending on...
very accurate, very scientific, very accurate.
And,
tomorrow we will take up the first 3 chapters. Not necessarily finish all of them, wherever we reach. But please read the first 3 chapters if you have time, and then come. So then it will save us time. But I'll summarize what Krishnamurti is pointing out in the first 3 chapters, and then we can discuss it. Thank you, all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Professor Krishna.
Thank you, sir.